I never stole from you, but you'll never believe me, so just let me go. That was the last thing Rosa Medina said to Damiano Caruso, the most feared man in New York City, before she walked out into the cold with nothing but a coat 2 sizes too big and a secret she was carrying alone. 14 days later, his phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. A doctor's voice, quiet, careful. Mr. Caruso, the woman had your card. She's been on a park bench all night in the freezing rain. Sir, she has a newborn with her, and she says the baby is yours. Damiano stopped breathing. If this story reaches your heart, subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's go. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Damiano Caruso didn't recognize the number. In his world, that meant one of two things. Either someone was about to ask him for something, or someone was about to warn him about something. He'd learned in 38 years of surviving a life most men didn't walk away from that there was rarely a third option. He answered. Mr. Caruso, a woman's voice, medical flat, careful. This is Dr. Reyes at St. Catherine's. I'm calling because we have a patient. She was brought in 2 hours ago, severe hypothermia. She had your business card in her coat pocket. Damiano set down his coffee. She specifically asked us not to call the police, the doctor continued. She was very clear about that. Name, he said, a brief pause. She says Rosa Medina. Something moved in Damiano's chest, not quite pain, not quite guilt. Something older and uglier that he didn't have a clean word for. Is she alive? She's stable. But Mr. Caruso, another pause, longer this time. The kind of pause that meant what came next had been carefully considered. She has an infant with her, a newborn, a boy. Silence. She asked me to tell you something before you came, the doctor said. Damiano's hand tightened on the phone. Tell me. She said, tell him the baby is his. Tell him I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't know where else to go. The line stayed open. The doctor was waiting. The city outside his window was already moving. Already loud, already indifferent. 42 floors below him, taxis and people, an ordinary Tuesday morning life that had absolutely no idea that something had just cracked open inside one of the most powerful men in New York. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Damiano said. He didn't wait for her response. He grabbed his coat off the chair, not the good one he didn't think about, which coat he just grabbed, and walked out of his penthouse without telling anyone where he was going. That alone told his security team everything they needed to know. In the car, he didn't speak. Marco, his driver of 11 years, knew better than to ask. Damiano sat in the back seat and stared at nothing and let the memory come because it was coming whether he wanted it or not. 14 days ago, he had called Rosa into his study at 10 in the morning. His accountant, Petrov, had placed a document on his desk the night before transaction, logs, timestamps, amounts, account numbers, all of it pointing with clean, damning precision to Rosa Medina. $12,000 moved in small, careful increments over 6 weeks and always during her access hours. He had looked at it for less than a minute. He had made his decision in 45 seconds. That was something he prided himself on, decisiveness. In his business, hesitation was expensive. Hesitation got people killed. Damiano Caruso had survived by being faster than everyone else, harder than everyone else, more certain than everyone else. 45 seconds. And he had destroyed a woman's life. He hadn't called her in quietly. He hadn't spoken to her privately. He had assembled the entire household staff in the hallway, 7 people, because in his world, consequences served as lessons. He needed everyone to see what happened when someone stole from him. Rosa had stood in front of his desk with her hands clasped in front of her and her face completely still. He remembered that stillness and understood it in a way he hadn't then. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't fear. It was the stillness of someone who has decided not to break in front of an audience. He had read the charges. She had listened. When he finished, she had said quietly, carefully, I didn't take that money, Mr. Caruso. He had said, I have documentation. And she had looked at him, just looked at him. That watchful, careful look that he had registered and dismissed and would spend a very long time thinking about. Then there's nothing more to say, she had said, and she had walked out. He hadn't followed her. He hadn't given it another thought that day. He had moved on to his next meeting, his next call, his next problem, because that was what you did when you were Damiano Caruso. You solved things and you moved forward. You didn't look back. He had looked back 3 days later when his head of finance caught something irregular in a different account. When the thread was pulled, when Petrov's whole carefully constructed skimming operation unraveled, like cheap thread on a spool, 18 months, multiple accounts, and documentation that had been manufactured with enough skill that it had fooled Damiano completely. Damiano had fired Petrov with 6 words and no further conversation. He had not called Rosa. He told himself it was because he didn't know where she'd gone. He told himself it was because the damage was done and there was no clean way to undo it. He had not told himself the real reason because the real reason was too simple and too humiliating. He didn't know how. Now he was 15 minutes from a hospital where that woman had spent the night on a park bench in 32-degree weather, keeping a newborn alive with her own body heat, with his business card in her pocket, because she had nowhere else to turn. Marco pulled up to the hospital entrance. Damiano was out of the car before it fully stopped. Dr. Reyes was waiting for him at the elevator. She was small, direct, and completely unimpressed by the 2 men who moved behind Damiano like shadows. That alone told him she was either very confident or very used to difficult men, probably both. "How bad?" he asked. No greeting. "She'll recover fully," the doctor said, "but another 2 hours and we'd be having a different conversation." She didn't soften it. He respected that. She was down to 89 degrees when she came in. She had the baby wrapped inside her coat against her torso, her own skin. He never dropped below normal. She made sure of that. Something locked in Damiano's throat. "She used herself as a human incubator," the doctor said, "to keep your son alive." "Your son." The words moved through him like current. "The baby's healthy." His voice came out lower than he intended. "Perfect APGAR score. 16 days old, well-developed, well-fed." She paused. She'd been taking care of him properly. Before last night, whatever happened that put her on that bench, it wasn't neglect. That woman has been doing everything right. "I know," Damiano said. And the weight of those 2 words, what they admitted, what they cost him, was considerable. Dr. Reyes studied him for a moment with eyes that had seen the full spectrum of human behavior in crisis and had stopped judging it a long time ago. "She doesn't know yet," the doctor said quietly, "about what we found during the examination." Damiano went still. "What do you mean?" "What did you find?" Dr. Reyes looked at him carefully. "I think that conversation should happen with you present," she said. "She's going to need someone." "Tell me what you found," Damiano said. His voice was very quiet, the kind of quiet that in other rooms made men step backward. Dr. Reyes didn't step backward. "I'll tell you both together," she said. "Go see her first. She's been awake since 4 a.m., and she hasn't asked for anything. Not food, not water, nothing except to know if the baby was warm enough." She paused. "Go see her." He went. Rosa looked up the moment the door opened. She was sitting up in the hospital bed, the infant against her chest, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face carrying a kind of exhaustion that was not just physical. It was the exhaustion of someone who has been holding something very heavy alone for a very long time and has simply run out of road. She looked directly at him. That was the first thing that hit him. Rosa Medina, who had spent 11 months in his household, moving like someone trying not to disturb the air, looked directly at Damiano Caruso and did not look away. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." The words came out rougher than he intended. "You didn't have to." "Rosa, I mean that," she said. I'm not trying to trap you into anything. Her voice faltered. Just once, she pulled it back together with a visible effort that he found somehow more painful to watch than if she had simply cried. "I had nowhere to go. That's the only reason I had your card. I wasn't going to use it. And then it was 2 in the morning and he was cold, and I—" "Don't," Damiano said. She stopped. He crossed the room. He pulled the chair to the side of her bed, not to the foot of it, not across the room right beside her. And he sat down and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at his son for the first time. Marco, he knew his name already. He didn't know why, he knew that she hadn't told him yet. But looking at that face, that small, serious, sleeping face with the fist tucked against the cheek, the name simply appeared in him fully formed. "Marco. He looks like your grandfather," Rosa said softly. Damiano's head came up sharply. How do you know what my grandfather looked like? A faint color came into her cheeks. There's a photograph on the bookshelf in your study. The man with the boat. She looked down. I dusted that shelf every week for 11 months. I noticed things. She had noticed a photograph of his grandfather on a boat in Sicily. She had noticed the shape of a face 3 generations back. And now she was holding a baby with that same face, and Damiano was sitting in a hospital chair trying to process the full volume of everything he had missed. What's his name? He asked, though he already knew. I've been calling him Marco, she said quietly. In my head. I didn't know if she stopped, started again. I didn't give him a last name yet. Damiano looked at the baby, then back at Rosa. Marco Caruso, he said. Her breath caught. It was small, barely audible, but he was close enough to hear it. You don't have to, she started. He's my son. His voice was steady. He made sure of that. His name is Marco Caruso. A beat, if that's acceptable to you. Rosa pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. She nodded once carefully, like she didn't trust herself to do more than that. I was wrong, Damiano said. Just that. No preamble, no lawyer's language, no careful construction. Rosa went very still. The money wasn't you, he said. I found out 3 days after you left. It was Petrov, my accountant. He'd been skimming for a year and a half across multiple accounts, and he manufactured the trail to point at you. He paused. I fired him. I should have. He stopped. He made himself finish it. I should have called you. I didn't. The room was very quiet. Why didn't you? She asked. The question was simple, direct. No anger in it, which somehow made it worse. Because I didn't know how to undo what I'd done, he said. I've spent my entire adult life making decisions that can't be taken back. I don't have a way of doing this. He gestured slightly, a gesture that encompassed the apology he was struggling to make and the inadequacy of it. I'm telling you now, I was wrong. You were not a thief. I called you one in front of 7 people, and I was wrong. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Okay. Damiano stared at her. Okay. I'm too tired to be angry right now. She looked down at Marco, her hand moving in a slow circle on his back. Ask me again in a month. Despite everything, despite the hospital room and the wait of the last hour and the things the doctor had said about an examination and something she hadn't told him yet, Damiano felt something move in his chest that was disturbingly close to wanting to laugh. I'll ask you again in a month, he said. She glanced at him sideways, quickly, like she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. He met her eyes steadily, and Rosa Medina, for the first time in a very long time, didn't look away first. The knock on the door was soft. Dr. Reyes opened it without waiting for an answer, and the expression on her face was the kind that stops conversation. Rosa looked at her, then at Damiano. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong, the doctor said carefully, but there's something we need to discuss. She moved into the room fully and closed the door behind her. Rosa, during your examination this morning, we ran some blood work. Standard procedure for hypothermia cases, especially postpartum patients. Okay, Rosa said slowly. Your blood pressure was elevated significantly, more than we'd expect from the hypothermia alone. We ran a panel. Dr. Reyes paused. Rosa, do you have a family history of cardiac issues? The color left Rosa's face. Damiano sat forward. My mother, Rosa said. Her voice had changed. Something careful and frightened moving underneath it. My mother died of a heart condition. She was 41. I see. Dr. Reyes set a tablet on the bed, test results numbers charts that meant something specific and serious to a trained eye. Rosa, what we found is not immediately dangerous. I want to be very clear about that. But there is a condition it appears to have been present for some time that was very likely exacerbated by the stress of last night, by the cold, by the physical exertion of protecting the baby. She paused. It's the kind of condition that untreated becomes serious, quickly. How serious? Damiano said. His voice was flat and controlled and completely betrayed by the tension in his jaw. Without treatment and monitoring, the doctor said, within 18 months. She stopped. She looked at Rosa. It becomes life-threatening. The silence in the room was absolute. Marco slept on against his mother's chest, small and warm and entirely unaware that the woman holding him had just been handed a sentence with a clock attached to it. Rosa stared at the wall. Her face was doing something complicated, cycling through things she was feeling and things she was calculating and things she was trying not to let herself think yet. Then she looked down at Marco, and then she looked up at Damiano. And in her eyes, those careful, watchful eyes, he saw the things she was not saying, the questions she would not ask, the fear she was holding alone the way she had held everything else because she had never in her life had anyone to hand it to. Damiano stood up from his chair. He crossed to the window. He stood there for a count of 5 with his back to both women, looking out at the city that belonged to him, the city that he ran, that he controlled, that bent to his will in ways that most people never knew. Then he turned around. "What does the treatment involve?" he asked Dr. Reyes. "Surgery," she said quietly, "and 6 months of intensive follow-up care, monitoring, medication. She cannot be alone during that period. She cannot be under stress." "She won't be alone," Damiano said. Rosa's head came up sharply. "Damiano, you'll come home with me," he said. Simple, final, the voice he used when things were decided. "That's not," she started. "You kept my son alive with your body in 32-degree weather," he said. "You sat on a park bench and turned yourself into a furnace so he wouldn't get cold." His voice went very quiet. "You are not going anywhere, Rosa. Not until you're well. Not—" He stopped. Something crossed his face, something unguarded that he hadn't planned to show and couldn't entirely take back. "Not until I know you're safe." Rosa stared at him. Dr. Reyes looked between them with the particular discretion of someone who has witnessed private human moments in professional settings for a long time and knows when to be invisible. "You barely know me," Rosa said. "I know you didn't steal from me when you needed money and had access to everything in my home for 11 months, Damiano said. "I know you spent 4 hours on a park bench in the cold and didn't put yourself first once." He held her gaze. "I know that you named my son after a man in a photograph you looked at every week for almost a year. I think I know enough." Rosa opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at Marco, looked back up. "I'm going to be angry about the accountant thing," she said quietly. "Eventually." "I know," he said, "and I'm going to need you to not—" She stopped, tried again. "I'm not good at accepting things from people, help and things like that. It makes me uncomfortable." "I know that too," he said. "We'll figure it out." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something new and fragile, and neither of them quite had the words for it yet, which was fine. Words could come later. Later was something they had now. Marco sighed in his sleep, a small, satisfied sound that somehow held in it the particular authority of someone who has already decided how things are going to be. And Damiano Caruso, who had spent 38 years being the most dangerous man in any room he walked into, sat back down in the chair beside the woman he had wronged and watched his son breathe. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about his schedule. He sat there, and for the first time in a very long time, he was exactly where he was. Nothing else. Just there. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that downstairs in the hospital lobby, a man in a gray coat had been sitting in the waiting area for the past 40 minutes. Not reading, not on his phone, just watching the elevator. Waiting. And the man in the gray coat knew something about Rosa Medina, something about who she really was, something that Damiano, for all his resources, all his instincts, all his 38 years of reading people, had never thought to look for. Because some secrets aren't hidden. They're just buried under the story you've already decided to believe. The man in the gray coat didn't move when Damiano's security team walked through the lobby. That was the first thing Marcus, head of Damiano's personal security, noticed. Most people shifted when they saw the team. Unconscious reflex, guilt nerves, simple human awareness of being watched. The man in the gray coat just kept his eyes on the elevator and turned a coffee cup slowly between his palms like he was doing something meditative and had all the time in the world. Marcus noted the face, filed it, said nothing yet. Upstairs, Damiano was on the phone in the corridor outside Rosa's room, his voice low and clipped, working through the list of things that needed to happen in the next 6 hours. The guest suite, the medical equipment Dr. Reyes had recommended for the first weeks of monitoring, a private cardiologist, the best in the city, not the second best. He had Felix on one line and his lawyer on another, and he was managing both with the particular focus of a man who has discovered that action is far more tolerable than feeling. Felix said carefully, "Sir, There's the matter of documentation. Paternity, if you want to formally establish. Do it today, Damiano said. Today. Is there a reason it can't be done today? No, sir, no reason. Then do it today. He hung up on Felix and stood in the corridor for a moment with his phone in his hand and the particular quiet of someone who has just made a series of decisions that cannot be unmade and is taking exactly 3 seconds to feel the full weight of that before moving forward. Then Marcus appeared at his elbow. Boss. His voice was the specific register he used when something was wrong but not yet critical. There's a man in the lobby, ground floor east waiting area. He's been there 45 minutes. He's not waiting for a patient. He's watching the elevator. Damiano didn't turn. Description: 50, maybe 55. Gray coat, no ID visible, no phone use. He came in 7 minutes after we did. Damiano processed that, 7 minutes after, which meant he hadn't followed them from the penthouse. He had been here first, or he had arrived almost simultaneously, which meant he had known where to come before Damiano did. Who else knew she was here? Damiano said quietly. Dr. Reyes called you directly. The card was the only contact information in her possession. Marcus paused. Unless someone was watching her before she came in. Damiano turned that over. Someone had been watching Rosa, watching her long enough to know she would end up at this hospital, or watching the hospital itself, which meant they either knew her routine or they had resources. Don't touch him, Damiano said. Don't approach him. Watch him. I want to know the second he moves. Yes, sir. Marcus disappeared. Damiano stood in the corridor another 3 seconds, then he went back into the room. Rosa was awake. Marco was asleep in the hospital bassinet they'd brought in, separate from her, now warm and monitored, but Rosa's eyes hadn't left him since they moved him. Damiano recognized that. The specific vigilance of someone who had learned that things they loved could be taken. You should sleep, he said. I slept on the bench, she said. That wasn't sleep. That was survival. She looked at him sideways. Are those different things? He pulled the chair close and sat. Yes, he said. They're very different things. Rosa studied him for a moment. That careful, measuring look that he was beginning to understand was not suspicion, it was assessment. She was deciding constantly how much to trust, how much to show. It was a skill he realized. A skill she had developed out of necessity, the same way he had developed the ability to read a room in under 10 seconds. Different circumstances, same origin. Can I ask you something, she said. Yes. The man you fired, Petrov. She said the name carefully, like she was handling something. He manufactured evidence against me specifically, not someone else on the staff. Me. She paused. Did you ever ask yourself why? Damiano went very still. He had not. That was the honest answer, and it landed in him with the particular force of things you should have seen and didn't. He had been angry, and then he had been solving the problem of Petrov, and he had never once turned the question around and looked at the other side of it. Why Rosa? Out of 7 household staff members with varying degrees of access, Petrov had built his manufactured trail pointing at the quiet woman who never made trouble and never drew attention. Why her? No, Damiano said. I didn't ask that. I think you should, Rosa said. Her voice was very quiet. I think that's an important question. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Marcus, one word moving. Damiano was on his feet before he'd made a conscious decision to stand. Stay here, he said to Rosa. Don't open the door for anyone except Dr. Reyes. Anyone. Do you understand? Rosa's eyes went sharp. What's happening? Probably nothing. He looked at her. She looked back. Lock the door after I leave. The bassinet is on your left. And then he was out the door. The elevator was slower than his patience could bear, so he took the stairs, which meant he was moving fast and quiet, and his security team was moving around him like a coordinated current. And when he came through the stairwell door into the lobby, the first thing he saw was the empty chair in the east waiting area. The gray coat was gone. He went out the side exit, Marcus said, materializing at his shoulder. 2 minutes ago. We have him on the exterior camera. He made a call before he left. A pause. Boss, he wasn't alone. What do you mean? There was a car waiting, black sedan, no plates. Marcus handed him his phone exterior camera footage, grainy but clear enough. The man in the gray coat climbing into the back seat. And through the window of the sedan, just visible, just enough, a second figure, leaning forward, saying something. Damiano looked at the image for a long moment. Get me the plates, he said, though he already knew they wouldn't find any. People who used cars without plates knew exactly what they were doing. There's something else, Marcus said. His voice had dropped another register. I ran a quick search on the side exit footage from last night. The timestamp for when Rosa came in. She came in alone, correct, walked in from the street, hypothermic, carrying the baby. A pause. But 4 minutes before she arrived, someone else came through that same exit. Came in, looked around the lobby, and left. Damiano turned. The same man. No, Marcus said. Different. Younger. But the way he moved, Marcus was ex-military, 12 years, 3 tours. He had very specific language for things. Professional, he said. He moved professionally. The piece clicked into place with a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone had been checking the hospital before Rosa arrived, confirming the layout, or confirming that it was safe, or, and this was the possibility that tightened everything in Damiano's chest, confirming that she was going to be there. Not following Rosa to the hospital, knowing she would come there, because someone had left her no other option. He went back upstairs. Rosa looked at his face when he came back into the room and she said nothing, but her hands went to Marco in the bassinet with an instinct that was entirely maternal and entirely correct. And he saw her understand that something was wrong before he said a word. I need to ask you something, Damiano said. He sat back down. He leaned forward. He made sure his voice was level. And I need you to think carefully before you answer. Okay, she said. Who knew you were pregnant before you left my house? Rosa was quiet for a moment. My doctor, the clinic in Queens. A public clinic. I didn't want to use your insurance because I didn't want... She stopped. I didn't want you to find out that way. Who else? My friends from church, the 2 women I was staying with. She paused. And Greta. Damiano went still. Greta. She figured it out, Rosa said. About 2 months before I left. She didn't say anything directly. She just started leaving crackers and ginger tea in my room on the mornings I wasn't feeling well. Rosa's voice softened slightly at the memory. She didn't make a thing of it. She was kind. Greta, his head of household for 9 years, meticulous, loyal Sicilian, the woman who had recommended Rosa in the first place. Did Greta and Petrov know each other? Damiano asked. He kept his voice entirely neutral. Rosa looked at him, and in the way she looked at him, the slight change in her breathing, the fractional hesitation he saw, that she had thought about this, had already thought about this, had been sitting on it. They talked, she said carefully, in the kitchen sometimes. Late. I noticed because he didn't talk to the household staff usually. He thought he was above it. She paused, but he talked to Greta. Damiano stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room for a count of 8, and behind him Rosa waited because she was good at waiting. She had been waiting her whole life for the thing that was true to finally be said out loud. Greta has been with me for 9 years, Damiano said. I know, Rosa said. She has access to everything. Every schedule, every contact, every arrangement in my household. I know. He turned around. Did she know where you were going when you left? Rosa pressed her lips together, then quietly. She's the one who told me about the church women in the Bronx. She gave me the address. A pause. She gave me your business card. She pressed it into my hand when I was leaving and said, Rosa stopped. Her voice had changed. She said, keep this. You may need it before this is over. The silence in the room was different now. Denser. Something with weight and implications sitting in the middle of it that neither of them was quite ready to name. Before this is over, Damiano repeated very softly. Rosa looked at him, and her eyes held that particular quality of someone who has been carrying a fear alone for a long time and is watching someone else arrive at it in real time. I thought she was just being kind, making sure I had a safety net. Or she was making sure you had a reason to call me, Damiano said. Rosa said nothing. Or making sure, he continued, his voice going quieter with each word, that someone else knew exactly where to find you. The breath went out of Rosa slowly. Marco stirred in the bassinet, and she reached in automatically, her hand on his back, her eyes still on Damiano. I don't want it to be her, Rosa said. I liked her. I know, Damiano said. I did too. He took out his phone. He called Marcus. Find Greta, he said, quietly. Don't alarm her. I just need to know where she is right now. Marcus said he'd handle it, Bennett. Damiano hung up. He sat back down in the chair because suddenly he needed to sit, and he looked at Rosa, and Rosa looked at him, and Marco breathed between them, small and even, and certain, the way that babies are certain without any concept of the complexity of the world they've arrived in. You're not surprised, Rosa said. About Greta. I'm surprised it took me this long to look in that direction, Damiano said. Why would Greta do this? Rosa asked. She's been loyal to you for... People are loyal until they're not, Damiano said, until someone offers them something more than loyalty is worth. He paused. Or until someone threatens something they care about more. Like what? He shook his head slightly. He didn't know yet, and not knowing yet was a specific kind of discomfort he was not accustomed to. Rosa shifted in the bed, adjusting position, and he saw her wince, a quick, involuntary thing she tried to conceal. The cardiologist was coming at 2 o'clock. Dr. Reyes had arranged it. The condition they'd found was treatable, manageable, but it required consistency. Rest, absence of exactly this kind of stress. You need to stop thinking about it, Damiano said. That's not possible. Try. Damiano. She said his name like a correction. Someone may have engineered the situation that put me on that bench. Someone may have deliberately made sure I had no money and nowhere to go, and a 16-day-old baby in the middle of winter. That is not something I can stop thinking about. He looked at her, she looked back. Neither of them looked away. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. Rosa blinked. He got the impression she wasn't often apologized to. You're doing that again, she said. What? Saying I'm sorry. You said it before about the accountant. I say it when I'm wrong, he said. It happens occasionally. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, something more complicated than a smile, something that had to navigate around exhaustion and fear and everything else to get where it was going, but it got there. Occasionally, she said. Don't push it, he said. And there it was, small, real fragile, but there. A thread of something human running between them in a hospital room. While the city moved below and somewhere downstairs, a man in a gray coat had gotten into a car without plates and made a call that Damiano needed very badly to trace. Marcus called back 18 minutes later. Damiano stepped into the corridor. Greta's apartment, Marcus said. She's not there. Neighbor says she left last night with 2 suitcases. Said she was visiting family in Sicily. A pause. Boss, Greta doesn't have family in Sicily. I checked her file. She has a sister in Palermo who died in 2019. No other relatives. Damiano closed his eyes just for a second. The particular feeling of a floor you thought was solid, showing you it was never solid, that precise sensation of betrayal that doesn't get easier no matter how many times a man experiences it in his life. In Petrov, he said. Do we have a current location? That's the other thing, Marcus said. His voice was flat, professional, containing something. Petrov left the country 4 days after you fired him. We have him on a flight to Geneva. And then, a pause that went on 1 beat too long. He was on a connecting flight to Palermo. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Rings expanding outward. Petrov, Greta, Palermo, the man in the gray coat, the car without plates. Rosa on a park bench with nowhere to go. Not coincidence, not opportunism. A plan, a deliberate, constructed patient plan, and at the center of it, Rosa Medina, a woman who had no money and no power and no protection, and who had somehow, without knowing it, made herself the most important person in the crosshairs of something much larger than a domestic theft. Damiano leaned against the corridor wall and did what he did when the pieces were coming in fast and the picture was still forming. He slowed his breathing, and he let it arrange itself without forcing it. Pattern recognition. It was the most valuable skill he had, and it had kept him alive more times than he could count. Rosa hadn't been a random target for Petrov's manufactured evidence. She had been specifically chosen, specifically vulnerable, specifically isolated. Someone had wanted her out of his house, and then someone had made sure she had nowhere else to go. The question, the only question that mattered right now, was what Rosa had or knew or was that made all of that necessary. He went back into the room. Rosa looked at his face and said, "Tell me," he told her. He watched the color change in her face as the information assembled itself into meaning, watched her hands go still on Marco's back, watched her process it with the particular courage of someone who has been surviving hard things alone for long enough that hard things no longer broke her the way they once might have. They just reconfigured her, bent her into a new shape, one that could hold more weight. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." Her voice had changed, lower, careful, the voice of someone approaching a thing they've been circling for a long time. "Before I came to work for you," she said, "I wasn't just a housekeeper. I mean, I was. But before that, for 2 years, I worked for a man named Aldo Ferretti." Damiano's body went completely still. Aldo Ferretti. The name moved through him like ice water. Aldo Ferretti, who had been his father's oldest rival. Aldo Ferretti, who had disappeared from New York 18 months ago under circumstances that remained officially unexplained. Aldo Ferretti, whose organization had been quietly dismantled from the inside in a way that no one had ever fully accounted for. "I cleaned his house," Rosa said. Her eyes were steady, watching him. "For 2 years I cleaned his house, and I listened. Because that's what people like me do. We become invisible, and we listen, and I heard things, Damiano. Things that I wrote down, things that I kept." "Rosa," Damiano said. "I kept records," she said, "documents. I have them. I've had them for 3 years, and I've never used them, and I've never told anyone because I didn't know who to trust, and I didn't know what they were worth, and I was—" Her voice finally cracked. "Just at the edge. Just for a second. I was scared. I was so scared, and I was alone, and I didn't know what to do with what I had." The full shape of it arrived in Damiano all at once. Rosa, Ferretti, the records. Why Petrov had specifically targeted her. Why someone had wanted her isolated, discredited, without resources. Why a man in a gray coat had been watching this hospital. Why Greta, who had hired Rosa in the first place. Greta, who had been in his household for 9 years, had pressed a business card into Rosa's hand and told her she might need it before this was over. Not protecting her. Setting her in motion. Setting both of them in motion. "Where are the documents?" Damiano said. Rosa looked at him, took one breath. Then she said, "Somewhere safe. Somewhere only I know." She paused. "And Damiano, what's in them is going to change everything you think you know about your father's death." The words hung in the room like smoke. Damiano didn't move, didn't speak. The man who had built an empire on reading situations faster than anyone else in the room sat completely still and let those 11 words rearrange everything inside him with a slowness that felt physical. "What's in them is going to change everything you think you know about your father's death." His father had died of a stroke 6 years ago, in his study, alone. The medical examiner had been thorough, the findings had been clean, and Damiano had buried his father in the Caruso family plot in Staten Island on a Tuesday in November with 400 people watching and the specific grief of a man who had loved his father and feared him in equal measure and never quite finished sorting out which feeling was larger. He had not questioned it, not once, because the examiner was credible and the evidence was clean, and Damiano Caruso, for all his instincts, had not been able to see past his own grief long enough to look at it like a problem to be solved rather than a loss to be survived. "Say that again," he said. His voice was very quiet. Rosa didn't flinch. "You heard me? I want to hear you say it again." She held his gaze. "What's in those documents is going to change what you believe about how your father died." She paused. "I'm sorry, I know what that is to say to someone." He stood up, walked to the window, stood there. Rosa watched his back and waited because she understood in the way she understood most things about people quietly, from observation, from years of making herself invisible, in rooms where important things happen, that Damiano needed 30 seconds to absorb this, without anyone watching his face. She gave him 45. "How long have you known?" he said without turning around. "I found the first documents 18 months into working for Ferretti," Rosa said. "I didn't understand everything immediately. Some of it took time to put together. But by the time I left his employment, I understood enough." "And you came to work for me?" "Yes." He turned around. "Why?" "Because I didn't know what to do with what I had." She said it directly without apology. "I couldn't go to the police. Half of what's in those documents implicates people inside the department. I couldn't go to a lawyer I didn't know because I had no money and no protection and no way to verify who was safe. She stopped. Her hand moved to Marco's back. I thought if I could get close enough to you, if I could know what kind of man you actually were, then maybe I could figure out whether you were someone I could trust with the truth. She paused. Or whether the truth would get me killed. Damiano stood in the middle of the room and looked at the woman in the hospital bed, this quiet, careful, underestimated woman who had walked into his life 11 months ago in a uniform that was too large for her, and understood with a clarity that was not entirely comfortable that she was several moves ahead of where he'd thought anyone was. You were investigating me, he said. I was deciding about you, she said. That's different. Is it? Yes. She met his eyes steadily. Investigating implies I was gathering evidence against you. I was gathering evidence about you. Your character. What you actually did versus what people said you did. How you treated people when you thought no one important was watching. A pause. How you treated me. And what did you decide, he said. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then, I decided you were a hard man who was mostly fair, who was capable of being wrong and not capable enough of admitting it, but not cruel. She paused. And then you called me a thief in front of 7 people and threw me out in my 3rd trimester, and I had to revise my assessment somewhat. That's reasonable, Damiano said. He said it flatly without deflection, and something in her expression shifted the slight easing of attention she'd been holding without realizing it. I still had the documents, she said. Even after, I kept thinking I would do something with them, find a way, but I had Marco coming, and then Marco was here, and every day was just surviving. And then last night happened. She looked at him, and here we are. Here we are, he said. He pulled the chair to the bedside and sat, close, not trying to intimidate the opposite. He leaned his elbows on his knees and dropped his voice to something that was not the voice he used for business or decisions or commands. Tell me what's in them. Rosa took a breath. Ferretti was working with someone inside your father's inner circle, she said, for at least 3 years before your father died. I found meeting records, payment transfers, correspondence coded, but not well enough. Ferretti wasn't subtle with his paperwork when he thought it was secure. Her voice was steady and careful, like she was reading from something she'd memorized. Whoever was inside your father's circle had access to his medical history, his medications, his schedule, and there are notes in Ferretti's handwriting that reference a date, the exact date your father died, written 4 months before it happened. The silence was total. Damiano's face did not change. He had trained himself over many years to receive catastrophic information without visible reaction, because visible reaction in his world was weakness, and weakness invited predators. He sat perfectly still and his face was neutral, and inside him something vast and dark was opening up like a fault line. Who, he said, one word, all the weight in the world inside it. I don't know, Rosa said. The correspondence never uses names, only a designation, 1 letter, the letter V. V. Damiano ran his index finger along his jaw. His mind was already moving, running through names, eliminating, reconstructing. V in his father's inner circle. Someone who had been there long enough to know the medications, the schedule, the vulnerabilities. Someone who had survived the transition of power when Damiano took over, which meant someone he had kept, someone he had trusted. Valentino, he said almost to himself. Rosa went very still. You know who it is? I know a man named Carmine Valentino, Damiano said. He was my father's consigliere for 12 years. He stayed on when I took over. He stopped. He's been with me for 6 years. Is he capable of it? Rosa asked. Damiano looked at her. The question was genuine. She wasn't leading him, wasn't suggesting, wasn't performing. She was asking because she genuinely wanted to know his assessment. I don't know, he said. And the honesty of it, the rawness of not knowing, sat in him like a foreign object. I thought I knew the people around me. So did your father, Rosa said softly. The sentence wasn't cruel, it was just true. And true things from this woman landed differently than they would have from anyone else, because she had no agenda in this room except honesty. The particular honesty of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has finally found a pair of hands she thinks might be strong enough to take some of the weight. Marcus knocked twice and came in without waiting. He looked at Rosa, then at Damiano. Sorry, it's urgent. Damiano stood. What? The car from the hospital. We got a partial plate. We ran it. He handed Damiano his phone. On the screen was a registration, a shell company, 3 layers deep, the kind of corporate structure that took real money and real expertise to build. But the address of record on the final layer was a building on the east side that Damiano recognized. He would have recognized it anywhere. It was the building where Carmine Valentino kept his secondary office. The room seemed to contract. "Get out," Damiano said to Marcus. "Close the door. No one comes in." Marcus was out and the door was closed in 4 seconds. Damiano turned to Rosa. She had seen his face when he looked at the phone, and she had read it correctly. He could tell from the way she had pulled Marco's bassinet another inch closer. "It's him," she said, not a question. "It points to him," Damiano said. "I need the documents, Rosa." "I know." "Where are they?" She hesitated. Just for a moment, and he understood the hesitation, not distrust, not calculation, but the reflex of someone who had protected this secret alone for so long that handing it over felt like stepping off a ledge, even when the person below had their arms out. "If I tell you where they are," she said carefully, "and something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you." "Damiano." She said his name the way she'd been saying it, like a correction, like a reminder that he was human and not invincible. And that certainty was something he offered too quickly. "You didn't know your housekeeper of 9 years was working against you. You didn't know your father's consigliere may have had him killed. Don't tell me nothing is going to happen to me." He opened his mouth, closed it. She was right. She was completely right, and she had the composure to say it directly to his face, and that composure was one of the most remarkable things he had encountered in a very long year time. "Fair," he said. "Then tell me what you need to feel safe enough to tell me." She thought about it, genuinely thought he could see it, the processing, the weighing. "I need Marco protected," she said. "Whatever happens, regardless of anything else, he is protected." "Done," Damiano said, no hesitation. "I need it in writing, from your lawyer. I'll call him right now. And I need," she stopped, her jaw tightened. "I need you to understand that I am not leverage. I am not a pawn in whatever this becomes. I came to you because I had nowhere else to go, and because Marco was cold, and I will help you because what I know needs to come out. But I am not yours to use." The words hit him squarely. Not harshly, they weren't delivered harshly, but squarely, directly, without any protective softening, and he felt them land in him with the full weight she intended. "You are not mine to use," he said. "You are Marco's mother, and you are a person who deserves better than what the situation has been." He held her gaze. "I understand that." Rosa studied him for a long moment with those careful dark eyes. Then she nodded. Once. The way she had nodded when he said Marco Caruso, that careful, considered agreement, that meant more than an easy yes would have meant. "Queens," she said, "the church where I used to volunteer, St. Brendan's on Jamaica Avenue. There's a room in the basement that the pastor uses for storage. He's a good man, he doesn't know what he's keeping. Behind the shelving unit on the east wall, there's a loose baseboard, a waterproof bag." She paused. 3 journals, a thumb drive, and a photograph. "A photograph of what?" "Of Ferretti and Valentino," she said, "together, at a restaurant in Little Italy. Dated 8 weeks before your father died." She let that land. "I took it myself on the disposable camera I kept for documentation. It's not sophisticated, but it's real." Damiano was already on his phone. He called Felix first, gave him the church address, and told him to go personally, no one else, and to call him the moment the bag was in his hands. Felix said he was leaving immediately. Damiano trusted Felix the way you trust something that has been tested repeatedly and has never failed, not without awareness that everything can fail, but with the specific confidence of demonstrated reliability. Then he called his lawyer. The lawyer, a compact, brilliant man named Hargrove, who had been managing Damiano's legal affairs for 11 years and had heard things in those 11 years that had permanently altered his capacity for surprise, listened to the summary without interrupting. Then he said, "You want a protective agreement for the child, regardless of any other outcome." "Ironclad," Damiano said. "And the mother?" Damiano glanced through the glass at Rosa, who was holding Marco, now speaking to him softly in Spanish. Her voice too quiet to hear through the door, her face doing something open and unguarded that it didn't do when she knew anyone was watching. "The mother too," Damiano said. I'll have it drawn by end of day, Hargrove said. He paused unusual for him and, Damiano, if what you're describing about your father is substantiated, one thing at a time, Damiano said. Of course, Hargrove said, and let it go, because he had worked for Damiano long enough to know when a door was closing. Damiano went back into the room. Rosa looked up. He told her Felix was en route and the legal documents would be ready by evening. She nodded and looked back down at Marco, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke, and the quiet between them had changed. It was different from the quiet of 2 hours ago, which had been the quiet of strangers in crisis. This was something else. Shared information, shared stakes, the particular silence of people who have handed each other something breakable and are both being careful. The cardiologist arrived at 2 o'clock. Dr. Sarah Okafor, 50s, direct with the manner of someone who had long since decided that clarity was kinder than comfort. She reviewed Rosa's results while Rosa held Marco and Damiano stood near the door with his arms crossed and the specific expression of a man who is being very controlled about being frightened. The condition is called peripartum cardiomyopathy, Dr. Okafor said. It's a weakening of the heart muscle that can occur in the final months of pregnancy or the period immediately following birth. It was likely developing for some time before last night. The hypothermia accelerated the stress significantly. She looked at Rosa directly. The good news is that with your age and otherwise good health, the recovery rate is favorable. Many women recover full cardiac function within 6 months. And the bad news, Rosa said, the next 6 months are not optional, Dr. Okafor said. Rest, monitoring, medication, no sustained physical or emotional stress. She paused, which I understand may be difficult given your circumstances. Rosa almost laughed. It came out as something smaller and sharper. Difficult, she said. She'll have everything she needs, Damiano said from the door. Dr. Okafor looked at him. And you are? He's Marco's father, Rosa said. Something in how she said it, matter of fact without hesitation, like it was already simply true, and had always been made Damiano's chest do something he'd have to examine later when he had the privacy for it. Good, Dr. Okafor said. She looked back at Rosa. You need to not be alone. That is not negotiable. Medically speaking, isolation in your condition is a risk factor. You need consistent monitoring and you need someone present. She closed her folder. I'll have the prescriptions sent down and we can discuss discharge in 2 days once we've run another panel. She left. The room settled again. She's right, Damiano said. I know, Rosa said, about the being alone part. I know, Damiano. You'll come to the penthouse when you're discharged. Rosa was quiet for a moment. It's going to be strange, she said. Most things worth doing are. She looked at him sideways again. That quick, assessing look. You do that, she said. Do it. Say things that sound like they should come with a fortune cookie, but somehow don't. This time he did almost smile. He felt it, the particular twitch at the corner of his mouth that he had suppressed for so many years. It had become almost involuntary. Almost. I'll take that as a compliment, he said. Take it however you like, she said, and there was something in her voice, light, brief, human, that hadn't been there 2 hours ago. Felix called at 3:17. I have it, Felix said. His voice was different, flatter. Boss, I've looked at some of it. The journals. I didn't read everything, He stopped. You need to see this. The photograph especially. What about the photograph? A pause, boss. There's 2 people in it, not one. Another pause. Boss, the second person in that photograph standing behind Ferretti. I recognize him. Damiano's jaw tightened. Who? It's not Valentino, Felix said. It's boss. It's your brother. The ground moved. Not literally, I am, but that was the only way to describe what happened to Damiano's sense of the fixed in certain things in his life, the ground he had been standing on, the history. He had known the people he had believed he understood, moving, shifting, rearranging into a topography he had never mapped. His brother, Enzo Caruso. 3 years younger, warmer, easier, the one who laughed at dinners, while Damiano calculated the one their mother had always worried about less, the one who had stood at their father's grave with tears running freely down his face, while Damiano stood dry-eyed and furious at himself for not knowing how to cry in public. Enzo. Are you certain? Damiano said. His voice was flat, stripped of everything. I'm certain, Felix said. I'm sorry. Damiano lowered the phone. He stood in the center of the hospital room with his phone at his side, and he said nothing, and his face did something that he had no control over just for a second, just 1 second before he pulled it back together. Rosa was watching him. She had heard the change in his voice, if not the words. She saw his face in that 1 second before he controlled it. And she said nothing because she understood in the way she understood most things quietly, precisely, without making a show of it, that there are moments when words are not what a person needs. She shifted Marco in her arms and held out her free hand. Just held it out, open, waiting, not demanding anything. Damiano looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and he sat beside her and he took it. Her hand was small and warm and had calluses from years of work, and it held his with a grip that was steady and unafraid. They sat like that without speaking. Marco slept between them, breathing his small, certain breaths. And outside the window in a car parked on the street below the hospital, a phone rang. The man who answered it listened for 30 seconds. Then he said 2 words. He knows. And the line went dead, and the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the current of the city, carrying a secret that was now in motion that could not be stopped, that was going to pull everything into its wake. The truth about a father's death, the loyalty of a brother, the courage of a woman who had sat on a park bench in the freezing dark and chosen over and over again to survive. Because surviving, as Rosa Medina had learned long before any of this began, was never just about yourself. It was about who you were holding when you did it. And she was holding Marco. And now, without entirely meaning to, she was holding Damiano too. He didn't sleep that night. Rosa slept finally deeply, the sleep of someone whose body had simply stopped negotiating and demanded its due. And Marco slept in the bassinet beside her, and Damiano sat in the chair with Felix's folder on his knees and read every page of what Rosa had kept hidden for 3 years. And with each page, the thing inside his chest that he did not have a clean word for grew heavier and older and more complicated. The journals were written in Rosa's handwriting, small, precise, careful, the handwriting of someone who had learned to document things accurately because accuracy was the only protection available to a person with no other kind. Dates, times, names, overheard conversations. Ferretti's household had been busy and careless, and Rosa had been quiet and thorough and invisible, and she had written down everything that mattered, and some things she hadn't yet known mattered. And reading it now, Damiano understood that what he was holding was not just evidence. It was 3 years of a woman's courage compressed into lined pages in a waterproof bag behind a baseboard in a church basement in Queens. He read the entry dated 4 months before his father's death twice, then a third time. Then he set the journal down and stared at the wall for a long time. The entry described a dinner, Ferretti's house. Late after midnight, Rose had been asked to stay late to handle cleanup after an event and had been moving through the house when she heard voices in the study. She had not intended to listen. She had stopped because the door was ajar and the first word she heard was a name she recognized. And she had stood in the corridor with a tray in her hands and listened to a conversation that she had written down word for word the moment she was alone. 2 voices. Ferretti's she recognized. The second voice she had not been able to identify that night, but she had written the words, and the words were specific and operational and damning, and what they described was not a stroke. What they described was a medication, a specific cardiac medication that in the wrong dosage over a sustained period would produce exactly the symptoms his father had experienced, would produce in a man of his age and his existing history something that looked exactly like a natural death. And the second voice, the one Rosa hadn't identified in the journal, had said one thing that she had underlined twice in red ink: Damiano will step in, he's stronger, he'll consolidate faster, it'll be cleaner for everyone. Cleaner for everyone. His brother had watched him grieve, had stood at the grave, had called him on the anniversary every year without fail, first to check in, he'd always said, because anniversaries were hard, and Enzo was the warmer of the 2 of them, the one who remembered to check in. Damiano had loved him for that, had felt the specific gratitude of a harder man for a softer brother who remembered the human things. He put the folder down. He looked at Rosa sleeping. He thought about the fact that she had carried this for 3 years alone, with no protection and no resources, and no certainty about what to do with it. And she had chosen to survive rather than surface it before she was ready. And she had been right, because surfacing it alone without protection would have gotten her killed. She had known that. She had been smarter about her own safety than he had been about his father's. At 5:30 in the morning, he made a call he had been turning over for 3 hours. Not to Marcus, not to his lawyer, not to Felix. He called Enzo. The phone rang 4 times. Then his brother's voice, sleep rough and warm. Damiano, it's 5 in the morning. I know, Damiano said. I need to see you today. A pause. Brief. The pause of someone waking up, or the pause of someone calculating. Damiano listened to it with new ears and could not, for the first time in his life, tell which one it was. Is everything okay? Come to the penthouse at noon, Damiano said. Don't be late. He hung up before Enzo could respond. Rosa's eyes were open when he turned around. She had been awake he didn't know for how long. She was watching him with those careful eyes, and she said quietly, You called him. Yes. What did you say? I told him to come at noon. She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do when he gets there? I don't know yet, Damiano said. And that honesty, that open, undefended admission of not knowing, was something that would have been impossible for him 24 hours ago and was merely very difficult now. Progress of a kind. He might not come, Rosa said. If he knows you have the documents, he doesn't know I have them, Damiano said. He doesn't know you're here. As far as anyone outside this room is aware, I came to the hospital this morning because a former employee had an emergency. Nothing more. He paused. Valentino doesn't know. Enzo doesn't know. That gives us a window. How long a window? Depends on how good their information is. He looked at her. The man in the gray coat. If he reported back last night, if whoever sent him knows you told me, then the window is already closing, Rosa said. Yes, she absorbed that, pulled Marco from the bassinet and held him against her shoulder in one smooth, practiced movement that spoke of 16 days of middle-of-the-night repetition. Then we need to move faster than they expect, she said. We, Damiano said. She met his eyes. Unless you think this is a situation where I sit in a hospital bed and wait to find out what happens. He looked at her for a moment. Dr. Okafor said no stress. Dr. Okafor said no sustained physical exertion and consistent monitoring. I can be monitored and informed at the same time. Her voice was level. Damiano, these are my documents. This is my 3 years. I have a right to be part of what happens next. He was quiet for a moment. Not because he disagreed, he had already begun to understand that disagreeing with Rosa Medina on a matter of principle was approximately as productive as arguing with the tide. He was quiet because he was working through the logistics of including her without exposing her, and the logistics were complicated. When you're discharged, he said finally. 2 days, she said. You have 2 days to set whatever you're setting before I'm in the room. 2 days, he agreed. Felix arrived at 7 with the legal documents from Hargrove. The protective agreement, the paternity acknowledgement, the trust established in Marco's name. Rosa read every page, all of it. She did not skim. She did not take Damiano's word for any of it. She read it with the specific attention of someone who has learned that documents matter and that the devil is always in the language. And when she was finished, she looked up at Felix and said, Page 8, paragraph 3. The language about primary caregiver needs to be more specific. Felix blinked. Yes, I can note that for Mr. Hargrove. I'd like it corrected before I sign, she said. Felix looked at Damiano. Damiano said nothing. Felix took out his phone and called Hargrove. When the corrected version arrived 40 minutes later and Rosa signed it, Damiano noticed that her signature was the same as her handwriting, small, precise, entirely controlled. Like everything else she chose to put her name to, he filed it and stood up and looked at her and said, I have to go. I need to move before noon. I know, she said. Go. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. There was something he needed to say, and he was going to say it because the last time he had left without saying something, he should have said the cost had been extraordinary. Rosa, he said. She looked at him. What you did, he said, keeping Marco alive on that bench, keeping those documents safe for 3 years alone, coming to me when you had no reason to trust me. He paused. That took more courage than anything I have ever asked of anyone who works for me. Rosa held his gaze. Her expression did that complicated thing, navigating through the layers of what she was feeling to find something honest to show him. I didn't do it for courage, she said. I did it because there wasn't another option. That's what courage is, he said. He left before she could answer. But he heard just before the door closed the small, sharp exhale she let out, half surprise, half something she was trying to contain. He carried it with him into the corridor and into the elevator and into the car, and it sat with him all the way to the penthouse like something warm in his coat pocket. Marcus briefed him in the elevator on the way up. The partial plate had been traced to a logistics company that, when unwound through 3 layers of incorporation, connected to a holding group that Damiano recognized. It was one of Valentino's structures, not Enzo's, which meant either Enzo had used Valentino's infrastructure deliberately, or Valentino was operating independently, or, and this was the possibility that Marcus raised carefully, watching his employer's face, Valentino was the primary actor, and Enzo had been a participant, perhaps not the architect. "Does that change thing?" Marcus asked. "It changes the order of questions," Damiano said, "not the questions." He spent the morning in his study. On the surface, anyone watching would have seen a normal Tuesday. Calls returned, decisions made, the ordinary machinery of his various enterprises moving forward. Underneath, he was building a structure of his own, careful and quiet, the kind of construction that looks like nothing from the outside until it's complete. He called Hargrove again. He called a federal contact he maintained at a discreet distance, a relationship of mutual usefulness that had never been tested at this level before. He told the contact obliquely that he might be bringing something significant and that he would need certain guarantees in exchange for certain information. The contact was quiet for a moment and then said with the careful language of a man managing his own position, "How significant?" "Significant enough," Damiano said, "that you'll want to be the one who has it." He hung up and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk his father had used, the study where his father had spent thousands of hours building the world that Damiano had inherited and maintained and expanded, the room where a stroke had taken him on a Tuesday morning 6 years ago. Damiano pressed his hands flat against the surface of the desk and sat with the full weight of what he now knew about that Tuesday morning, and he let himself feel it, really feel it, for the duration of one controlled breath. Then he exhaled and moved on, because grief was a thing to be honored and also a thing to be scheduled. And right now, grief had to wait. Enzo arrived at 12:03. He came in the way he always came in, without announcement, using his key, calling Damiano out from the entry the way he had since they were boys, and this kind of casual access between them had been a simple fact of brotherhood. He was wearing a blue jacket and his face was open and slightly concerned, the face of a younger brother responding to an early morning call from someone he loved. Damiano was standing when Enzo came into the study. He had not sat down. He had decided somewhere in the last 2 hours that this conversation needed to happen with him on his feet. "You look terrible," Enzo said immediately. "Did you sleep?" "Sit down, Enzo." Something shifted in Enzo's face. Barely. A fractional adjustment, not guilt, not quite, but the slight change of a person who has walked into a room and sensed the temperature is different than expected. "What's going on?" "Sit down," Damiano said again. Enzo sat. He sat in the chair across the desk, the visitor's chair, the chair across from Power, which was not where he usually sat when it was just the two of them. He usually came around the desk. He did not come around this time. "I need to ask you something," Damiano said, "and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course," Enzo said. His voice was careful now. "Do you know a man named Aldo Ferretti?" Silence. Not a surprise silence. Not the silence of someone searching their memory. A different silence measured assessing. The silence of someone deciding how much the other person already knows. "Enzo," Damiano said. "I've met him," Enzo said. "In passing, a few years back. I don't know him." "In passing," Damiano repeated. "Yes. At a dinner, at his house, 8 weeks before our father died." The color left Enzo's face, not gradually all at once, like a tide going out faster than it should. "Who told you that?" Enzo said. "There's a photograph," Damiano said. Enzo stood up. "Damiano, sit down. I can explain." "Sit down, Enzo." His voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the specific quiet that people who knew Damiano Caruso understood was more serious than shouting. Enzo sat. "Explain," Damiano said. What followed was 20 minutes that Damiano would spend the rest of his life parsing in quiet moments. His brother talked. He talked in the halting, rearranging way of someone who has a story they've rehearsed, but who has been caught off balance, so the rehearsed version keeps colliding with the real version, and neither one comes out cleanly. The shape of it assembled from the pieces 3 years before their father's death. Enzo had made a business decision that went badly. A debt significant, the kind that carried consequences beyond money in their world. Ferretti had found out about it and had approached Enzo not as a threat, but as an offer, a friendly offer. He would make Enzo's problem go away, and in exchange, Enzo would simply provide certain information. Access schedules, medication details, the ordinary information of a son who spent time in his father's house. I didn't know what he was going to do with it, Enzo said. His voice had dropped to something raw. I swear to God, Damiano, I did not know. But you found out, Damiano said. A long pause. After, Enzo said. I found out after. His voice broke on the last word, a real break, not a constructed one, the break of genuine grief that has been living alongside genuine guilt for 6 years. I have spent 6 years. He stopped, started again. There is not a single day. Stop, Damiano said. Enzo stopped. You gave him the information, Damiano said. You let them use you, and then our father died, and you said nothing. I was scared, Enzo said. You were scared, Damiano said. The 2 words landed like stones. Enzo looked at his brother's face, and what he saw there made him look down at his hands. He was not a bad man, Damiano knew that. He had always known it, and that in some ways made this harder, not easier. Bad men were simple. They did bad things because they were bad. But Enzo was a weak man who had been caught in something larger than his weakness could manage, and had made the worst decision available, and had carried the consequences in silence, while grief moved through his face on anniversaries like something real. Because it was real. That was the thing, the grief was completely real. The guilt and the grief had been living side by side inside Enzo for 6 years, and Damiano had watched his brother for 6 years and seen only the grief. Valentino, Damiano said. Was he Ferretti's contact or yours? Ferretti's, Enzo said immediately. I never dealt with Valentino directly. Ferretti used him. He was already inside your organization, already feeding information out. I only found out about him after our father died, when I realized the full scope of what Ferretti had been running. And Greta, Enzo looked up. What about Greta? She's gone, Damiano said. Left the night before last. 2 suitcases, a flight to Palermo. The confusion on Enzo's face was genuine. He could read his brother's confusion. Enzo had not known about Greta, which meant Greta was Valentino's piece, not Ferretti's, which meant the operation had more moving parts than even the documents accounted for, which meant that whoever had set Rosa up, whoever had taken Petrov's manufactured evidence and added the isolation and the homelessness in the park bench in the cold, that had not been Enzo. That had been Valentino operating on his own 6 years after Ferretti's death, maintaining a structure that Rosa hadn't known she was threatening. Ferretti is dead, Damiano said. I know, Enzo said. I heard. 2 years ago. Then who has been running Valentino since Ferretti died? Enzo looked at him, and in his brother's eyes, Damiano saw something he wasn't expecting. Not guilt, not evasion. Knowledge. The specific weighted knowledge of someone who has one more thing to say and is not sure they will survive saying it. Enzo, Damiano said. There's someone else, Enzo said quietly. There was always someone else. Ferretti wasn't the top. He was management. There's a person above him, above all of it, who I have never seen and never met. But I know the name they use. Damiano's whole body was still. What name? They call him the architect, Enzo said. And Damiano? His voice dropped to almost nothing. Whatever you're planning to do with the documents, whatever you have already put in motion. He already knows. He has known since last night. And the reason Valentino has been here all along, the reason Greta was in your house, the reason they wanted Rosa gone. He stopped. His hands were shaking on his knees. It wasn't about the documents. Then what was it about? Damiano said. It was about Marco, Enzo said. It was always about Marco. The air went out of the room. Damiano stared at his brother. The architect has been planning a transition, Enzo said. For years, a restructuring of everything, every organization, every territory, every alliance in this city. And the one thing standing in the way of that restructuring, the one factor they couldn't control, was a Caruso heir. His voice was almost inaudible now. They knew about Rosa before you did. They knew she was pregnant before you did. They have been managing this situation deliberately to make sure the baby was born into circumstances where he could be controlled or removed. The word removed landed in Damiano's chest like a blade. His son, his 16-day-old son, sleeping in a hospital bassinet with a monitor on his ankle, was not collateral in something aimed at Damiano. He was the target, had always been the target. The park bench, the hypothermia, the isolation, not cruelty for its own sake. Strategy. Get the mother desperate enough to surface. Get the baby into circumstances where access was possible. "Where is Valentino right now?" Damiano said. His voice was a different thing now. Something stripped of everything except precision. "I don't know," Enzo said. Damiano was already on the phone to Marcus. "Find Valentino, now, whatever it takes. He does not leave the city." Marcus said 4 words. "Already on it, boss." Damiano looked at his brother. Enzo was sitting in the visitor's chair with his hands on his knees and his face open in the specific way that people's faces are open when they have said the true thing finally, and the relief of it and the terror of it are arriving simultaneously. "I'm sorry," Enzo said. "I know that's not—" "Stop," Damiano said, not cruelly, just firmly. "We are going to finish this, and then you and I are going to have a different conversation. But right now I need every single thing you know about the architect. Every detail, every fragment, everything you have ever heard or seen or inferred." Enzo nodded. He straightened. And Damiano watched his younger brother assemble something like resolve from the wreckage of 6 years of cowardice and grief, watched him decide right there in the chair across the desk to do the thing he should have done 6 years ago. "There's a meeting," Enzo said. "Tonight. Valentino was contacted 2 days ago. I intercepted the message through a back channel I've been monitoring since after our father. The meeting is at 10 o'clock, an address in Red Hook." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the desk. Damiano looked at it, memorized it, looked back at his brother. "You've been monitoring Valentino." "For 2 years, Enzo said. "I didn't know who to bring it to. I didn't know who was clean and who wasn't. I didn't know," he stopped. "I didn't know if you'd believe me or forgive me." Damiano looked at his brother for a long moment. The man across the desk from him was not a villain. He was something more complicated than a villain, a weak man who had made a terrible choice and then spent 6 years trying to quietly atone for it without the courage to bring it into the light. Damiano had known men like that. He had judged men like that. He was not entirely sure sitting here now that he had the right to judge this one. "Go home," Damiano said. "Don't contact anyone. Don't tell anyone we had this conversation. I'll call you." Enzo stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and said without turning around, "Is there a woman the baby's mother?" "Yes," Damiano said. "Is she safe?" "She's going to be." Enzo nodded. Something in the set of his shoulders changed, a small easing, like a man who has been holding his breath for 6 years and has finally been told he can exhale even if only partially, even if not all the way. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." He left. Damiano sat alone in his father's study with the folded paper in his hand and the full architecture of the last 6 years assembling itself in his mind with a clarity that was almost unbearable. He sat with it for exactly 4 minutes, he knew, because he watched the clock on the wall, the one his father had kept there, the one that had been ticking in this room on the Tuesday his father died. Then he picked up his phone and called the hospital. Rosa answered on the second ring. Her voice was alert. She hadn't been sleeping. "There's a meeting tonight," he said without preamble. "Red Hook, 10 o'clock. Valentino will be there. Possibly others." "The architect," she said. "Maybe." He paused. "Rosa, what I'm going to do tonight, I need you to know what's in motion. Not because I need your permission, because you have a right to know." A pause on her end. He heard Marco making a small sound, heard her adjust the phone. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. Enzo's admission, the architect, the meeting, what he was planning and outline. He told her the way he had not told people things in a long time directly without managing the information, without controlling what she received. Just the truth handed across, trusting that she could hold it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Be careful." 2 words, not a plea, not a demand, just 2 words in a quiet voice that somehow contained more weight than a longer sentence would have. "I will," he said. "Damiano." She paused. "Whatever happens tonight, Marco is going to need his father to come home." He stood in his father's study with the clock on the wall ticking and the folded address in his hand and the full weight of everything he was and everything he had to do and everything he had almost lost, pressing on him from all sides. And he felt clearly, simply without ambiguity, what it meant to have something worth coming home to. I know, he said. He hung up, he stood, he straightened his jacket. Red Hook, 10 o'clock, he had work to do. Marcus had 12 men in Red Hook by 8:30. Damiano knew because Marcus called him at 8:32 to confirm positions, and Damiano listened to the report while standing in his closet putting on a jacket that was not the good one, and not the casual one, but the specific one he wore when things were going to get serious, and he needed his hands free and his mind clear. Marcus listed names, positions, contingencies. Damiano listened to all of it and said 3 words when Marcus finished: "No one moves first." "Understood," Marcus said. "I mean it," Damiano said. "Whatever happens in that room, I need what's said on record before anyone moves. The federal contact is 2 blocks out. He needs content, not a scene." "Yes, sir." "And Marcus," he paused, "if something goes wrong with the contact and if Valentino has someone inside the federal team pull everyone back, the documents are already in Hargrove's safe. That's enough to proceed legally. We don't need tonight to be more than it is." "What is it?" Marcus asked. Damiano thought about that for a moment. "A conversation," he said, "a very expensive conversation." He drove himself. That surprised Marcus, who said so, and Damiano said he needed the 30 minutes to think, which was true, but it was also true that he needed to be alone with what was happening inside him before he walked into a room where he could not afford to let any of it show. His father's face was in his mind, not the face from the funeral, not the face from the last years when age had softened the hard edges, the face from his childhood, from the early years when his father had been the largest and most certain thing in his world. The face of a man who had believed in the people around him with the particular faith of someone who has built loyalty through fear and has confused the two things. His father had never known the difference between loyalty and obedience. Damiano had spent 38 years trying to learn it. He was still learning. He parked 2 blocks from the address. He sat in the car for exactly 3 minutes. He thought about Rosa saying, "Be careful," in that quiet, direct voice. He thought about Marco's face, that small, serious, sleeping face that had the shape of a man in a photograph on a bookshelf in Sicily. He thought about what it meant to have something worth coming home to, which was not a thing he had allowed himself to think about in a very long time. Because wanting things made you vulnerable, and vulnerable men in his world did not survive. But Marco was already here. Rosa was already here. The vulnerability was already a fact. The only question now was what he was going to do with it. He got out of the car. The warehouse in Red Hook was the kind of place that looked like nothing from the outside because it was supposed to look like nothing. Damiano had used similar spaces himself. He knew what they were used for. He went in through the side entrance Marcus had identified, moving with the particular quiet of a man who had learned stillness as a survival skill before he learned anything else. Valentino was already inside. He was standing near a table with 2 other men. Damiano recognized associates mid-level, the kind of men who showed up when things needed to be witnessed but not decided. Valentino himself was 61, compact with silver hair, and the permanently composed expression of a man who had spent decades being the calmest person in difficult rooms. He had been Damiano's father's consigliere. He had attended every Christmas dinner for 12 years. He had held Damiano's mother's hand at the funeral. He looked up when Damiano walked in and his face did not change at all. That told Damiano everything he needed to know about how long this man had been preparing for this moment. "Damiano," Valentino said, warm, easy, the voice he used for Christmas dinners. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is," Damiano said. He walked to the table and stood across from Valentino and did not look at the 2 associates. He kept his eyes on Valentino the way you keep your eyes on the thing that matters. And the thing that mattered was the face of the man who had sat in his father's house for 12 years and then helped end his father's life, and then sat in Damiano's house for 6 more years watching the aftermath. "Sit down," Damiano said. "I'm fine standing," Valentino said. "Sit down, Carmine." He hadn't used the first name in years. The use of it now was not warmth, it was the opposite of warmth. It was a removal of the professional distance that had always given Valentino a kind of dignity in these interactions, and Valentino felt it because something shifted in his composed expression, barely just at the edges, but Damiano caught it. Valentino sat. "The woman," Damiano said. "Rosa Medina. You knew about her. I knew you'd hired a housekeeper." "Don't," Damiano said. The single word was flat and final. "We are past the performance. I have the documents. I have the journals. I have the photograph. I have a federal contact 2 blocks from this building who has copies of all 3. He paused. And I had a conversation with my brother this afternoon. Something moved in Valentino's eyes. Fast and quickly controlled, but there. The calculation of a man reassessing how much ground he has already lost. Enzo, Valentino said quietly. Enzo, Damiano confirmed. Silence. The 2 associates were very still. They were beginning to understand that they were in a room where the thing happening was larger than they had been briefed for, and men in that position had only 2 instincts, fight or disappear. Neither of them moved. Damiano noted that and filed it. Petrov manufactured the evidence against Rosa on your instruction, Damiano said. You needed her out of the house before she did something with the documents she'd been keeping for 3 years. You used Greta to make sure she was isolated. No money, no shelter, no options. You had someone watching the hospital to make sure she called me because you needed her to surface so you could locate the documents before I did. He paused. What you didn't account for was that she'd already told me where they were, or that Enzo had been watching you for 2 years. Valentino looked at him steadily. You're going to hand me to the federal contact, he said, not a question. That depends on what you tell me in the next 10 minutes, Damiano said. Valentino tilted his head, just slightly. What do you want to know? The architect, Damiano said. The name landed. Valentino's composure held, but his breathing changed. Damiano saw it in the slight rise of his shoulders, the controlled exhale through the nose. You know that name, Damiano said. Where did you hear it? Enzo? Enzo doesn't know who it is, Valentino said immediately. But you do, Damiano said. The silence stretched. Valentino looked at the table, then at Damiano. The composed expression was still there, but something underneath it had shifted the particular quality of a man who has spent decades calculating odds and has just encountered a configuration where the math no longer works in his favor. If I give you that name, Valentino said slowly, I'm a dead man. If you don't, Damiano said, you spend the rest of your life in a federal cell. Your choice about which version of finished you prefer. Valentino looked at him for a long moment. He trusted you, Damiano said. His voice went quieter. My father trusted you for 12 years. He called you family. He trusted you the way you trust someone who has been in your house at Christmas, who has watched your sons grow up, who you believe is on your side. He paused. And you sat in his house and you helped them kill him, and then you sat in my house for 6 more years and had dinner at my table and looked me in the face. Every day. His voice was very controlled, very precise. I want to understand something, Carmine. Did you ever not once feel the weight of that? Valentino was quiet for a long time. Every day, he said finally. His voice was different. The warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was not the coldness Damiano expected. It was something tired, something that had been carrying weight for a long time. I felt it every day. Then help me finish it, Damiano said. Another pause. Valentino looked at his hands, then he looked up. And the name he said next was one that Damiano recognized not from his father's world, not from his own organization, but from a completely different direction. A name from the legitimate world. A name from the world of banks and real estate and political fundraisers and charity galas, where men like Damiano were not invited and had never tried to be. A name so unexpected that for 3 full seconds, Damiano simply stood with it, turning it over, and then the whole shape of it, the full, elaborate, patient architecture of it, came clear. The architect was not a crime boss. He was a banker. 63 years old, Yale-educated, on the board of 2 hospitals in a performing arts center. A man whose name appeared in the society pages and whose face appeared at ribbon cuttings and whose money had been moving through criminal infrastructure for 25 years behind a wall of corporate structures so clean and so well-maintained that no one had ever looked at him from that direction. Because no one looked at men like that from that direction. That was the genius of it. That was why he had chosen the name he had. He built things that couldn't be seen from the outside. His name, Damiano said. Say it again, clearly. Valentino said it again. Damiano took out his phone. He said the name one more time slowly directly into the recording that had been running since he walked through the door. Then he looked at Valentino and said, You're going to repeat everything you just told me to the federal contact outside, every detail. Dates, amounts, methods, everything. Valentino nodded. He looked Damiano thought like a man who has been holding something crushing for too long and has finally been relieved of it, not free, not innocent, but unburdened. Sometimes that was the most a person could hope for. The two associates were taken into custody without incident. Valentino walked out with Marcus on one side and the federal contact on the other, and as he passed Damiano in the doorway, he stopped for just a moment and said without looking at him, "Your father was proud of you. He said it often. You should know that." Damiano said nothing. Valentino walked out. Damiano stood alone in the empty warehouse for 90 seconds. He stood with his father's pride and his father's death and 6 years of not knowing occupying the same space inside him, and he let all of it exist simultaneously without trying to resolve it. Because some things were not problems to be solved and some losses were not equations that could be balanced. His father was dead. He had been helped to die by people his father had trusted, and his father had been proud of him, and both things were true, and Damiano was going to have to find a way to live with both of them for the rest of his life. He took one breath, then he walked out, and he got in his car, and he called Rosa. She answered before the first ring finished. "Are you okay?" "Yes," he said. "Did you get what you needed?" "Yes." And Valentino, with the federal contact. A pause. He heard her exhale slow, control the breath of someone releasing something they've been holding for hours. The architect. "We have a name," he said. "It's going to take time. Lawyers, federal process building a case. But we have a name and we have Valentino's testimony and we have the documents." He paused. "It's enough." "Okay," she said. That single word again, the one she used when she had processed something and accepted it and was ready to move forward. He was beginning to understand it as one of the most efficient words in her vocabulary. "Rosa," he said. "Yes. I'm coming to the hospital." "It's almost midnight," she said. "I know. Visiting hours ended at 9. "I know that too." A pause. "The night nurse is very strict," she said, and there was something in her voice, that brief, careful lightness that had to navigate around everything else to get there, but got there. "I'll manage," he said. He drove back across the bridge with the city spread out around him and the particular feeling of something large having shifted in the world, not resolved, not finished, not clean, because nothing in his life was ever clean, and he had stopped expecting it to be, but shifted. The weight redistributed. The future configured differently than it had been 48 hours ago. The night nurse was indeed strict. She told him in a voice that was impressively firm for someone half his size that visiting hours were over, and that she didn't care who he was, which was actually something he respected. He stood at the nursing station and said very quietly that his newborn son was in that room and that he had just come from a situation that had required him to be somewhere else, and that he would very much appreciate 5 minutes, and he said please, which was a word he used rarely enough that it still had weight when he did. The nurse looked at him for a long moment. 10 minutes, she said, and you're quiet. He was quiet. Rosa was awake. She was sitting up in the hospital bed with Marco against her shoulder, and when Damiano came through the door, she looked at him the way she had been looking at him since that first morning, carefully, directly assessing, and then something in her face went still in a different way than her usual stillness. Softer. "You look like you've been through something," she said. "I have," he said. He pulled a chair to the bedside and sat and leaned his elbows on his knees, and for a moment he just looked at his son. Marco was awake, Arnie, eyes open, dark and unfocused in the way of newborns, tracking nothing specific, but present, undeniably present in the room and in the world, with the complete authority of someone who has not yet learned to be anything other than exactly what he is. "I want to tell you something," Damiano said. "Okay," Rosa said. "My father's name was Carlo," he said. "He was a hard man, harder than me, which is saying something. He built everything I inherited with his hands and his instincts in a particular kind of ruthlessness that I've spent my whole life trying to decide what to do with." He paused. "He made a lot of mistakes. He trusted the wrong people. He confused loyalty with obedience, and it cost him everything." Another pause. "And tonight I found out he was proud of me. I found out from the man who helped kill him, and I don't entirely know what to do with that." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You don't have to do anything with it right now." "I know. You just have to hold it," she said. "Sometimes things just need to be held for a while before you know what they are." He looked at her. She was looking at Marco, her hand moving in that slow automatic circle on his back. her face doing the open, unguarded thing it did when she didn't know anyone was watching. Except she knew he was watching. She just wasn't hiding anymore. "You do that," he said. She glanced at him. "Do what, say things that are true in a way that lands differently than other people saying true things." She considered that. "It's because I'm not trying to make you feel better," she said. "I'm just saying what's actually true." "I know," he said. "That's why it lands differently." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile, something more considered. "You're going to be strange to live with," she said. He blinked. "You're already planning to live with me." "I'm planning to live in your guest suite while I recover from a cardiac condition," she said with great precision. "That's not the same thing." "Naturally," he said. "Don't push it," she said. And there it was again, that small, real careful thread of something human running between them. And this time it was a little less fragile than before, a little more able to hold weight the way things are when they have been tested and have held. He reached out and touched Marco's hand, the tiny fist curled against Rosa's collarbone. Marco's fingers opened reflexively and closed around Damiano's index finger with the grip of someone who has no concept of restraint and no reason to practice it. Damiano looked at his son holding on to him and felt something unlock in his chest that had been locked for a very long time. Something he didn't have a ready word for and was not going to force a word onto because some things were better before they were named. "The architect," Rosa said quietly, "the one Valentino named. Is it going to be enough to bring him down?" "The federal contact thinks so. Valentino's testimony combined with the journals and the photograph, it's a significant case. It'll take time. He has resources and lawyers, and he spent 25 years building walls." He paused. "But the walls have cracks now, and I have good people working the cracks. And your brother." Damiano was quiet for a moment. "Enzo gave me the meeting location tonight. He's been monitoring Valentino for 2 years, waiting for a way to surface what he knew." He paused. "It doesn't undo what he did, but it's something. Are you going to forgive him?" The question was direct and genuine, and he considered it the same way. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Not yet, maybe eventually." He looked at Marco. "He's going to want to know his uncle." Rosa said nothing for a moment. Then, "Family is complicated. Everything worth anything is complicated," Damiano said. She tilted her head. "Fortune cookie," she said softly. "I know," he said. "I can't help it." The 10 minutes the nurse had given him stretched to 20 and then to 30, and at some point Rosa's eyes grew heavy, and she adjusted Marco in her arms and said without looking at him, "You can stay if you're quiet," in a voice that was trying to be matter-of-fact and was mostly succeeding. He stayed. He sat in the chair beside the bed, while Rosa slept and Marco slept, and the hospital moved around them with its nighttime sounds, the distant call of a monitor, footsteps in the corridor, the particular hush of a building full of people at their most vulnerable. Damiano sat in it and didn't fight it, which was new. He was not a man comfortable with vulnerability, his own or anyone else's. He had spent his entire adult life building walls against it, maintaining distance, controlling the perimeter. Marco had arrived in the world 16 days ago, and already the perimeter was a different shape. He thought about what Enzo had said. It was always about Marco. The architect had seen the Caruso heir as a variable to be managed a piece on a board, had engineered an elaborate situation designed to control or eliminate that piece before it could become a factor, had sent Petrov and Greta and the man in the gray coat, and had set Rosa adrift in the cold with no resources, all to prevent a 16-day-old baby from becoming something that threatened a plan 25 years in the making. And all of it had collapsed because Rosa Medina had sat on a park bench in 32-degree weather and wrapped herself around her son and refused to let him get cold. Not because she had the documents, not because she had knowledge that could bring down an empire, because she was a mother who had run out of road and had one business card in her pocket and had made the call. Sometimes the thing that breaks the architecture of evil is not a counterattack. Sometimes it's a woman deciding that her child is going to be warm and everything else following from that. At 4 a.m, his phone buzzed. A message from the federal contact arraignment scheduled. "Case is solid. Stand by for further." Damiano read it twice, then put his phone away. He looked at Rosa sleeping. He looked at Marco. He had come to this hospital 36 hours ago because a doctor had called him about a woman on a bench with his business card. He had arrived expecting a problem to manage. He had found instead a reckoning of his own assumptions, his own failures, his own history, his own capacity for something he hadn't practiced enough to be good at yet, but he was going to practice. Dr. Okafor came for morning rounds at 6:15 and found Damiano in the chair beside Rosa's bed and said with the professional neutrality of someone who had seen everything visiting hours started at 8. "I know," Damiano said. She looked at him, at Rosa, at Marco. She made a note in her chart. "Rosa's levels this morning are better than yesterday," she said. "If today's panel holds, we can discuss discharge tomorrow." "Good," Damiano said. "She needs consistency," the doctor said, looking at him directly. Not at Rosa, at him, making sure the instruction landed where it needed to land. Routine, no disruption, no crisis. The heart heals, Mr. Caruso, but it heals on its own schedule, and it cannot be rushed. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" she said, not unkindly, just precisely. He held her gaze. "I'm learning," he said. The doctor considered that. Apparently it satisfied her because she nodded and made another note and left without further commentary. Rosa opened her eyes. She had been awake for the last part of that. He could tell from the slight curve at the corner of her mouth. "I'm learning," she said. "Don't start," he said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." She looked at him with those careful dark eyes that had been watching him from a distance for 11 months and were now watching him from 3 feet away, with nothing between them. No uniform that was too large, no careful invisibility. Just Rosa in a hospital bed, with her son looking at the man who had wronged her and come back and was still here at 6:15 in the morning, because he was in his own complicated and imperfect and entirely real way learning. "What happens now?" she said. He thought about it, the honest answer unmanaged. "The legal process on the architect takes months, possibly longer. Valentino's in custody. Greta. I'll deal with Greta. Enzo and I have a conversation ahead of us that I'm not ready for yet, but will be." He paused. "Marcus is going to increase security on the penthouse until the federal case closes. Dr. Okafor says you need consistency. I have a guest suite with morning light that nobody uses." He looked at her. "And I have a son who is going to need both of his parents in the same place long enough to figure out how to do this." Rosa held his gaze. "That's a very practical answer," she said. "I'm a practical man." "You sat in a hospital chair all night," she said. "That's not practical." "No," he admitted. "That wasn't practical." She looked at Marco, then back at Damiano. Something settled in her expression, the specific quality of a person who has been surviving alone for so long that the arrival of someone steady and present feels foreign and slightly terrifying, and also beneath all of that, like something they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. "Okay," she said, her word, the one that meant she had waited and decided and was ready to move. "Okay," he said. Marco stirred between them, made the small, authoritative sound of someone who had decided the conversation had gone on long enough without him, and opened his eyes and looked at his father with the complete, fearless attention of someone who does not yet know that the world is difficult, who only knows that he is warm and held, and that the people around him are present. Damiano looked back. He looked at his son and thought about his father and about Rosa on a park bench and about documents in a waterproof bag and about the architecture of things built to last and the architecture of things built to destroy and which one endured. He thought about a woman who had walked into his house in a uniform that was too large for her and had made herself invisible for 11 months and had, in the process of watching him, decided he was worth the truth. He thought about what it cost her and what it cost him and what it had already, in 36 hours, begun to build between them, something unnamed. Something careful, something that had been tested by a cold and betrayal and fear and had held. Some things hold, he thought, even when they shouldn't, even when they are made from unlikely materials in impossible conditions. Sometimes the thing that survives is the thing nobody saw coming. Rosa Medina had been sitting on a park bench in the freezing dark with nothing but a coat and a business card and a child she was refusing to let get cold. And that ordinary, fierce, unspectacular act of a mother deciding her son would survive had been enough to bring down an empire, expose a decades-long conspiracy, and change the life of the most feared man in New York City. Not a bullet, not a war, not a power play, or a negotiation, or any of the weapons Damiano Caruso had spent his life mastering. Just a woman who refused to let go. Marco Caruso had arrived in the world with nothing to his name and had already at 16 days old changed everything. And in the years that followed through the federal trial that made front pages for 3 consecutive weeks, through Rosa's recovery and the slow, careful negotiation of 2 complicated people, learning to share a life through Enzo's long, hard road towards something that might eventually be called redemption, through every ordinary and extraordinary moment of a family assembled from the wreckage of betrayal and the decision to stay, Marco Caruso would grow up knowing one thing above all others: that the most powerful force his father had ever encountered was not a rival, not a weapon, not the architect with his 25 years of patient construction. It was a woman on a bench in the dark holding on, and his father had been smart enough finally to recognize it. That was enough. That was everything. That was where the story ended and where their life began.